Ever wonder which fashion icons left us too soon? Did you know some of the industry's brightest stars died under mysterious circumstances? Have you heard the tragic stories that changed fashion forever? Number 9. Alexander McQueen, the rebellious visionary. Could anyone have predicted the tragic end of fashion's dark prince? On February 11, 2010, the fashion world stood still when news broke that 40-year-old Alexander McQueen had taken his own life in his London apartment. The son of a taxi driver who rose to become one of fashion's most celebrated designers was gone, just days after his mother Joyce had passed away. McQueen, born Lee Alexander McQueen in London's East End, transformed the fashion landscape with his technical brilliance and theatrical runway shows that pushed boundaries and often shocked audiences. His Highland Rape collection sparked controversy, while his hologram of Kate Moss floating like a ghost became legendary. The man known for skull-print scarves and bumster pants had conquered both the streets and haute couture. What made his death particularly haunting was that it occurred as Fashion Week was about to begin, and just 3 years after his close friend and discoverer Isabella Blow had also taken her own life. In his suicide note, McQueen asked that his dogs be well cared for. His final collection, inspired by Byzantine art and old master paintings, was presented posthumously to a grieving audience. Lady Gaga, one of his greatest admirers, later dedicated her ARTPOP album to him. The McQueen brand continues under creative director Sarah Burton, but the fashion world still feels the absence of the rebellious genius who once worked as a tailor on Savile Row before shaking up the entire industry. His Metropolitan Museum of Art exhibition, Savage Beauty, became one of the most visited fashion exhibitions in history, evidence of his enduring impact and the void his death created. Number 8. Versace, Murder on Ocean Drive. Who could forget where they were when they heard Gianni Versace had been shot? On a sunny morning in July 1997, the fashion world was forever changed when 50-year-old Gianni Versace was gunned down on the steps of his Miami Beach mansion. The Italian designer had just returned from his morning walk when Andrew Cunanan, a spree killer who had already murdered 4 others, shot him twice at point-blank range. Versace had built an empire based on Mediterranean sensuality, bold prints, and Miami vibrancy. His designs celebrated the body and sexuality, with safety pins and metal mesh becoming his signatures. He dressed Princess Diana, Elton John, and created the iconic black dress that launched Elizabeth Hurley's career. The Versace mansion, Casa Casuarina, was a palace of excess where he entertained Madonna and other celebrities of the 1990s. The murder became instant international news, with photos of the blood-stained steps splashed across newspapers worldwide. His sister Donatella, who had worked alongside him for years, was thrust into the spotlight as the new face of the brand. Just 9 days after killing Versace, Cunanan committed suicide on a houseboat, taking with him the answer to why he targeted the beloved designer. Versace's funeral in Milan was attended by Princess Diana, who would lose her own life in a tragic accident just weeks later. Elton John, Sting, and models like Naomi Campbell mourned openly. 2 decades later, the story gained renewed attention through Ryan Murphy's American Crime Story, The Assassination of Gianni Versace, reminding a new generation of the shocking day when fashion lost one of its greatest showmen and innovators. Number 7. Isabella Blow, fashion's eccentric talent scout. What happens when fashion's greatest champion of new talent can no longer find joy? In May 2007, the fashion industry was shaken when news emerged that Isabella Blow, the eccentric fashion editor and talent discoverer, had died at age 48 after drinking weed killer. It was her 7th suicide attempt. Blow was instantly recognizable for her outlandish Philip Treacy hats and red lipstick, but her greatest contribution to fashion was her unerring eye for talent. She famously purchased Alexander McQueen's entire graduate collection, launching his career, and also discovered models Sophie Dahl and Stella Tennant. Her aristocratic background, she was Isabella Delves Broughton, belied a troubled personal history, including witnessing her brother's drowning as a child and a father who squandered the family fortune. Her funeral was as dramatic as her life. Her coffin arrived in a horse-drawn hearse, accompanied by a mourning party dressed in McQueen and Treacy. She was buried wearing a McQueen red and gold dress and a sailing ship hat by Treacy. Despite her role as British Vogue's fashion director and later at Tatler magazine, Blow struggled financially throughout her life, reportedly selling her wardrobe pieces to pay bills. Her death highlighted the dark side of fashion's glamour. Friend Daphne Guinness later purchased Blow's entire wardrobe when it was set to be auctioned at Christie's, preserving the collection that told the story of British fashion in the 1990s and 2000s. The 2010 exhibition Isabella Blow, Fashion Galore, at Somerset House celebrated her vision and influence, showing how one woman's eye had shaped contemporary fashion, making her death all the more poignant. Number 6. L. Ren Scott, Behind the Glamour. Can someone surrounded by fame and beauty still feel utterly alone? The fashion world was stunned in March 2014 when L. Ren Scott, the statuesque designer and longtime partner of Mick Jagger, was found dead in her Manhattan apartment. The 49-year-old had taken her own life by hanging, leaving no note but many questions. Standing 6 feet 3 inches tall, Utah-born Scott had first made her mark as a model before transitioning to styling, working with celebrities like Nicole Kidman and creating costumes for films such as Ocean's 13. Her design career launched in 2006 with a collection of little black dresses, and soon her figure-enhancing creations were worn by Madonna, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Michelle Obama. What made her death particularly shocking was the contrast between her public image, glamorous, successful partner to a rock icon, and the private struggles she faced. Reports emerged after her death that her company, LS Fashion Limited, was millions of dollars in debt. She had been planning to announce the closure of her business, but hadn't told friends or family about her financial troubles. Jagger was in Australia preparing for a Rolling Stones tour when he received the devastating news. The tour was immediately postponed as he flew back to New York. At her funeral in Hollywood Forever Cemetery, Jagger sang Bob Dylan's Just Like a Woman in tribute. Her fashion archive was later divided among family members, with some pieces going to the Costume Institute at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, preserving the legacy of a designer whose elegant creations belied her troubled final days. Number 5. Ossie Clark, the King of Kings Road. How did a designer who dressed the Beatles and Rolling Stones end up stabbed in a council flat? In August 1996, the fashion world received shocking news that Ossie Clark, once the darling of swinging London, had been murdered in his small London apartment. The 54-year-old was stabbed multiple times by his former lover, Diego Cagalato, who was later diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Clark had defined 1960s and 70s fashion with his sinuous cuts and flowing dresses in psychedelic prints often created by his wife, textile designer Celia Birtwell. Mick and Bianca Jagger were married in his designs, while clients included Marianne Faithfull, Twiggy, and Liza Minnelli. His floating chiffon dresses and tailored trouser suits revolutionized women's clothing, earning him the nickname King of Kings Road. Yet Clark's later years were a far cry from his heyday. After divorcing Birtwell in 1974, he struggled with drug addiction and bankruptcy, eventually being evicted from his studio in 1983. He found himself living in social housing, occasionally selling sketches to friends to make ends meet. By the 1990s, he was largely forgotten by the industry that once celebrated him. His death brought renewed attention to his work. Today, vintage Ossie Clark pieces command high prices at auction, and retrospectives have celebrated his innovative cutting techniques. David Hockney's famous painting, Mr. and Mrs. Clark and Percy, showing Ossie and Celia at the height of their success, hangs in London's Tate Britain, a lasting reminder of a designer whose tragic end contrasted so sharply with his colorful, celebrated early career. Number 4. Gia Karangi, the first supermodel's fall. What happens when beauty can't save you from your demons? In November 1986, the fashion industry lost one of its most striking faces when Gia Karangi died of AIDS-related complications at just 26 years old. She became one of the first famous women to die of the disease that was devastating communities but rarely discussed in mainstream media. Karengi had exploded onto the fashion scene in the late 1970s as one of the first supermodels, appearing on numerous Vogue and Cosmopolitan covers and in campaigns for Armani, Christian Dior, and Versace. With her fierce look and androgynous appeal, she broke the mold of the all-American model, embracing a raw sexuality that changed fashion photography forever. But behind the perfect images lay a troubled soul. Abandoned by her mother at age 11, Gia struggled with feelings of abandonment throughout her life. Her meteoric rise in the fashion world led to a heroin addiction that quickly derailed her career. By 1980, needle marks were visible in some of her photographs, and she became increasingly unreliable. Photographers who had clamored to work with her now refused to book her. After failed attempts at rehabilitation, she disappeared from fashion altogether, working at a checkout counter and eventually turning to prostitution to fund her drug habit. By the time she was diagnosed with AIDS, she was destitute and estranged from the industry that had once worshipped her. Her story later inspired the 1998 HBO film Gia, starring Angelina Jolie, introducing a new generation to the cautionary tale of fashion's fallen angel. Number 3. Maurizio Gucci, Dynasty and Death. Who would order a hit on the air to one of fashion's greatest dynasties? On March 27, 1995, 46-year-old Maurizio Gucci was gunned down as he walked into his Milan office building. The last of the Gucci family to head the luxury leather goods company was killed by a hitman in a crime that would eventually be traced back to his ex-wife, Patrizia Reggiani. Maurizio, the grandson of Guccio Gucci, who founded the company in 1921, had navigated family feuds to gain control of the company in the 1980s, only to sell his shares to investment group Investcorp in 1993 for approximately $170 million. His tenure had been tumultuous. He'd ousted his own uncle Aldo, modernized the brand, but also accumulated massive debt. 2 years after selling his stake and walking away from the family business, he was killed in a professionally executed assassination. For nearly 2 years, the case remained unsolved until a tip-off led police to Reggiani, dubbed the Black Widow by Italian press. She had been openly bitter about their divorce settlement and feared Maurizio would marry his new girlfriend, potentially reducing her and their daughter's inheritance. The trial revealed an extraordinary conspiracy. Reggiani had hired a hitman through her personal psychic and friend, Pina Orima. She was sentenced to 29 years in prison, later reduced to 26, and was released in 2016 after serving 18 years. In a shocking postscript, despite being convicted of ordering her ex-husband's murder, Italian law still entitled her to the annual $1,470,000 allowance from Maurizio's estate, plus back pay from her time in prison. The sordid tale became the basis for Ridley Scott's 2021 film House of Gucci, bringing the fashion dynasty's darkest chapter to a new generation. Number 2. Rudolf Moschner, Munich's flamboyant icon. How does a designer known for dressing royalty end up strangled by a sex worker? In January 2005, the fashion community was shocked when Rudolf Moschner, one of Germany's most colorful designers, was found dead in his Munich villa. The 64-year-old had been strangled with a telephone cord by Harish Ali, a 25-year-old Iraqi who later confessed he'd killed the designer after a dispute over payment for sexual services. Moschner, instantly recognizable for his jet black toupee, makeup, and constant companion, his Yorkshire Terrier Daisy, had built a luxury menswear empire catering to celebrities, Arab royalty, and wealthy Bavarians. His boutique, Carnaval de Venise on Munich's exclusive Maximilianstrasse, was a temple to flamboyant luxury that stood in stark contrast to typically conservative German fashion. Despite his public persona as an extravagant dandy, Moschner maintained deep privacy about his personal life. He never publicly discussed his sexuality, instead focusing media attention on his charity work with homeless people and his devoted relationship with his mother, Else, with whom he lived until her death in 1993. His murder pulled back the curtain on his carefully constructed image, revealing a man who frequented Munich's central train station looking for male sex workers. The killer was quickly captured through DNA evidence and sentenced to life imprisonment. Moshhammer's funeral became a spectacle nearly as theatrical as his runway shows, with Daisy riding in the hearse and thousands of fans lining Munich streets. His villa, Moshhammer Palace, was later turned into a museum, preserving the legacy of a designer whose private struggles remained hidden behind a carefully crafted public image until his violent end. Number 1. Gianni Bini, the mystery in the Arno. Can a rising star simply vanish without a trace? The fashion world was baffled in September 1997 when promising young shoe designer Gianni Bini disappeared near Florence's Arno River, only to have his body discovered days later in circumstances that have never been fully explained. At just 32, the Florentine designer had been making waves with his affordable yet fashion-forward footwear that blended Italian craftsmanship with contemporary styles. His eponymous line had been picked up by major retailers across Europe and was beginning to gain attention in the American market when tragedy struck. According to reports, Bini had been celebrating a successful presentation during Milan Fashion Week when he returned to Florence and was last seen walking along the Arno late at night. When he failed to appear at an important meeting the following day, colleagues raised the alarm. His body was discovered 3 days later downstream, with the official cause of death listed as drowning. What makes Bini's death particularly mysterious was the timing, coming shortly after Versace's murder that same summer, and the circumstances surrounding his last hours. Some friends reported he had been concerned about business associates with dubious connections, while others suggested he had been struggling with the pressure of his rapid success. The Bini family continued his shoe line, which later became a successful global brand stocked in department stores worldwide. Many young consumers today may recognize the name without knowing the tragic story of its founder, whose promising career was cut short along the banks of one of Italy's most famous rivers. Who will be next to join this tragic list? Has the fashion industry learned to better protect and support its creative minds? Or will the pressures of an industry built on beauty, youth, and constant reinvention continue to claim more victims?